All right, everybody, we are back with chapter 3. We are ready to dig in to the material today. And when we look, I'm just going to do a quick refresher, and it's going to be short and sweet on this one. Last time we finished up talking about the fact we have these three energy systems, and we have the ATP phosphocreatine system. Sometimes we just call it the phosphagen system. We have the glycolytic system, and then we have the aerobic system. And of these, two are anaerobic, which means they don't require oxygen. And those are the two that occur in the cytoplasm, right? So the ATP phosphocreatine system and the glycolytic system are anaerobic, which means they happen in the cytoplasm and they don't produce a ton of energy, but they produce it quickly, more quickly than through the aerobic system. And when we talk about the aerobic system, we're talking about not only using carbohydrate for fuel, but also being able to use fat and protein if you need it. But most of the time, you don't need protein or very much of it for energy during exercise. So, everybody okay with this? And we talked a little bit about last time around the cell and the two most important parts, and that's why you see this on the slide. Two most important parts for us of the cell are the cytoplasm, or the soup of the cell, and the mitochondria. And that's because the first two systems, the anaerobic systems, occur in the cytoplasm, and then the oxidative or aerobic system occurs in the mitochondria. And that's important. We probably, what aerobic exercise is, but understanding and looking at these pathways. And we talked a little bit about too last time that, hey, a couple reasons to understand these metabolic pathways is one, so that when people ask you questions around supplements, diets, those types of things, you can put the supplement and see where it might fit into metabolism to see if it even has a mechanism of action of how it's going to work. And most of them do. Problem is, most of them don't work. But then also to help with your training, we talked about the fact that there's something called metabolic specificity. And most athletes, that's why they train the way they do. They know it works, but they're not sure why. It's because they're training these metabolic pathways and the enzymes and all these products to be produced and to work more efficiently and effectively. Okay. So now this is in where we would, and again, I mentioned the term metabolic specificity. It is true that athletes train. This is a new slide, right? This is new. Athletes train energy systems. That's what they do. We don't think about it, but essentially, whether your coach is coaching you up or you're training yourself, and in general, we have two types of athletes. And this is, again, I'll do this in face-to-face class. So I'm going to try to do it here as well. We'll see how it goes. We have two general types of athletes, right? We have the strength and power athletes, and we have the endurance athletes. So if you had to choose, which one are you? Are you strength and power, or are you endurance? Or maybe you're a little of both. Maybe you go into the gym and you do a little of both. Anybody? Just type in the chat. There's no judgment. Strength and power or endurance. If it were me, I'm doing endurance. Endurance for a long time. You want to be in blow. Yeah, endurance. So I go out and do these, I told you I do these races and do these events, and actually getting ready to go out for a 10-mile run here after class. So I'm more of an endurance guy. But there are a lot of people that are strength and power. And so if I had to ask you, and you can type this in the chat, what's the most extreme strength and power athlete you can think of? What's the most extreme strength and power athlete? Bodybuilders, football players, okay. What else you got? Power lifters, that's a good one. Yeah, power lifters. Anybody else? Logan says power lifters. Yeah, they can't give much more strength and power than the power lifter. Or can you? I mean, the most extreme. Anybody? Hmm. Rugby, sprinters, okay. Gymnasts, maybe. Okay, yeah, they're all strength and power athletes. What is the most extreme? In boxing? Okay, good. So I don't know how this is going to work. In class, I can always, okay, CrossFit. I love it. Thinking outside the box. Anybody? One last chance before I. So let me do this. Anybody ever heard of the strongman competition? Strongman competition. So let me see if I can stop sharing. I'm going to try to share another screen, and I don't know that this is even going to work. I should probably have tried this uh, to see how. Let me stop sharing and see if I can pull this up to the top. Maybe that's, okay. See if I can share this now. I'm trying to share okay, I think I can. Now you're going to see all kinds of stuff here. So this is an example of can you see this screen? Somebody in the chat? You can see it's blurred right now. So basically I'm going to try to play a YouTube video. In class, it's a lot easier because can you see that? Yeah, okay. So, ooh, I don't know that you can hear. So let's see if I can. I'm not going to show all of this. And I don't think I can control so their job is to pick up these stones and place them on, and this is just one of the things they do, and put them up on these big platforms. And these stones weigh hundreds of pounds. He's already exhausted. Ugh, ugh. Let's see if he's going to get this. I don't know that he's going to be able to get, and you can see he's at like 45 seconds. Ugh, he's like, he's done. And so oftentimes they have them competing against one another. So here you go. They've got them competing. Ugh. Some of these guys, there's technique to this too. But you can see this is ridiculous, right? Let's see. So I'm going to try something different. Can you still see my screen? It, of course, there's an ad. Can y'all see my screen at all? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. So I'm just gonna. So here's an example of one of the strongman. The plane weighs 44,000 pounds. Are you kidding me right now? Course length, 25 meters. So they're pulling a plane 25 meters is there and the fast for the fastest time. This is about as extreme as I think you can get. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Wow. Ugh. Ugh. All right. Let's see if I can stop this. All right. So I just wanted to show you. Did everybody see that you said it was kind of choppy? I should probably pay attention to this because my internet, I think I said this the very first day of class, is pretty slow. In Blackboard, when I'm teaching this, actually I was able to put these videos, some of these things in Blackboard, in the videos that I've already recorded. It's more difficult to do it here live, with especially with pretty poor internet. But I just wanted to show you that these strongman competitors, there's all these crazy events they do, everything from Atlas stones, where they're picking up these big stones, to pulling planes, to actually lifting ridiculous amounts like deadlifts. Like you just need to search to have some fun and see what kind of crazy events they do. A farmer's walk where they carry really heavy loads in their hands and they're walking a distance. Um, so that's probably one of the most extreme type of strength and power athlete. So what about, type in the chat, what do you think the most extreme endurance athlete is? Anybody? What do you think the most extreme endurance athlete? What do you think? Michael Phelps triathlon, okay. And there are different distance triathlons. You know, I do Ironman triathlons, but there's actually a double Ironman. Um, American Ninja Warrior. Is American Ninja Warrior those endurance athletes or are they more strength athletes? Soccer players, okay, you could say they're endurance. Are they the most extreme though? What's the most extreme endurance? You know, an Ironman triathlon, it would take me, it's probably going to take me 10, 12, 15 hours. Not 15, hopefully not 13 hours, maybe 14, um, but there are even more extreme events than that. There's ultra runs. Anybody know what an ultra run is? It's anything over like a marathon, but there are like 50-mile runs, 100-mile runs. Actually, coming up in Arkansas, there is the what do they call Arkansas Traveler 100, which is up around Perryville. You can search that Arkansas Traveler 100, and it's in October. It's a 100-mile run there in the forest. Another extreme event is, and let's see if I can share this. I'm going to try this again. Let's see how it goes as I try to share this screen. Okay. It's called Bad Water. And this is a really old video. And this is coming through for me. It's kind of loud, but I'll make this bigger. But this is a 135-mile run through Death Valley. So you can see that everybody is wearing, yeah, I can't understand anybody who want to do that. It's just the challenge, right? They're all wearing white. That's because the sun is so hot that the bottom of their shoes, their soles will melt. That's why you'll see them running on the white lines on the road, and not running on the black asphalt. Um, and they have crews that follow them along and try to help them. Again, I'll maybe play a little bit more of this, but Uh, so there's her crew helping her out, trying to help her work through. Looks like she's having some cramping. But like I said, it's so hot that the soles of their shoes will melt, and they just wear. That's the reason they wear a light. So this is a pretty extreme, and it starts at sea level, or maybe a little below sea level, but it climbs up to Mount Whitney, and I forgot how high that mountain is. I don't even know if they show it here. Uh, they do, but anyway, I'll just stop sharing. But that's another extreme of another, and that's for running. But anybody ever heard of Diana? You think that just when you think that's extreme, uh, anybody ever heard of Diana Nyad? My guess is probably not. Would these runners ever take breaks for water? Yes, they basically will carry water with them, and they have crews that can follow them and travel with them to support them along the way. But that doesn't make it any easier to run 135 miles to Death Valley for sure. But the last one I want to show you for extreme is, and let's see if I can pull it up here. I'm going to close this. Is Diana Nyad. And she actually swam, and I'll share this real quick. She was a swimmer, and I don't know if you can see this. I'm gonna make this a little bigger, pull it down a little bit. Long distance swimmer. This has been a while, about 10 years ago. She swam 53 hours from Cuba to Florida. So she swam that in the ocean with sharks in cold water. And in the ocean, which is not like glass, right? It's going to be choppy and waves, and there was a boat that floated along with her, but 53 hours of swimming. Are you serious? So just when you think, oh, maybe someone doing a marathon is extreme, not really. Another one I need to pull up is a competition call. I'll let you RAM. I think it's RAM, and it's basically a bike race across America. And these people will start on one coast and they'll end on the other. And it takes them like 7 days to do this or something. It's ridiculous how fast these people are biking. And, it's a race, so they limit their sleep. And they have sort of like the ultra running group, they have crews that will go with them. And maybe they'll let them sleep for like an hour maybe or something. They just don't want them to get into deep REM sleep or they'll have trouble waking them up. But they basically race across America on a bike. So I just wanted to show you this. I always do this in classes because just to show you that there are some really extreme, whether it's a strength and power strongman people or whether it's the ultra runners and the swimmers and the bike racers. There's just a ton of people doing some crazy stuff. And it's, why do they do it? Mainly for the challenge and just to continue to stay healthy. So at least that's why I do it. And we do it. At this point, when I was younger, I used to be able to be more competitive. But at this point in my age, it's like, I'm just happy to participate and still be able to complete these and have fun with it. So, all right. So let's go back. I'm going to go back and we are going to get back into the content. Now, close this down. All right. So now let's begin to talk about the different systems. The first system is the ATP phosphocreatine system. And what do you need to know about the ATP phosphocreatine system is that it's the most immediate method in which we actually regenerate ATP. Remember, we said this last time, maybe a couple times, is that we need this ATP and we don't have it in any unlimited amounts. We always are having to regenerate it. And so ATP phosphocreatine system is the most immediate way we do that. And basically what you're doing is you're taking the phosphate from the creatine phosphate and you're donating that phosphate to ADP to regenerate ATP. And so the limiting part of this is that you only, for every phosphocreatine molecule, you're only going to produce one ATP. But it is the most immediate way that we get energy. And sports that last anywhere from 3 to 15 seconds. And when I say sports, this is where I think sometimes, and write this down because students get confused on this. When I say football, I know that a football game lasts several hours, but that does not make it aerobic. Does that make sense? That does not make it aerobic. What we focus on is the actual play. How long does a football play take? How long does one lap around the track take? How long does a 100-meter sprint take? Not the fact that they're going to be on the track for an hour. Their event may last and their play may last seconds. And that's what we're talking about here. So anything that lasts less than 15 to maybe even up to 30 seconds would be ATP phosphocreatine. Everybody following that? So the most common example is a football play or a baseball, right? Running to first base, second base, maybe even, or third, where it's only going to take a few seconds to do that. You're running down a ball in the outfield would be an example of that. But think about the football. I always pick on the old lineman, like you get this center here. So the center gets down, the quarterback says hut, they start the play, and then they go really hard for a few seconds trying to push each other around, running the play, and then they take a break and they go back to the huddle. And as they go back to the huddle, that's when they're regenerating this ATP. Okay, this is when that ATP is regenerated, and then they go back out and run another play. Hope that makes sense. And again, this is one of the reasons why one of the most popular supplements is creatine as a supplement, because this is one of the only ones that actually works. And if you have more creatine, then you can bind more phosphate, and then it allows you to do more work. And we can talk about that more when we get into the getting into the supplement chapter. I think I got a slide on this too coming up. But does that make sense, where really anything from up to about 30 seconds, you're using this energy system as the primary energy system? Everybody okay with that? And so this is what it looks like. You're basically taking this creatine phosphate molecule with an enzyme creatine kinase, splitting the phosphate from the creatine, and then this phosphate is used to add to ADP to make ATP. It's a one-step process where you're donating that phosphate with the enzyme as creatine kinase. Does that make sense? Is that good? And make sure everybody can see my screen, right? I want to make sure that everybody's seeing this. All right. So here's one of the things to know. So with ATP, right, we always are having to regenerate that ATP. Here's what we know. We have usually 3 to 5 times the creatine phosphate stores as we do the ATP stores. So as long as we've got creatine phosphate to donate, we can maintain our ATP levels up to a pretty good level. So here's an example of someone doing a sprint on a bike. And I've hand drawn this, so bear with me. Basically, you've got 100% of resting value. So 100% of ATP stores are full, and then 100% of our creatine phosphate stores. But as I start to pedal on a bike all out, within the first 2 seconds, look what happens to creatine phosphate. We start donating that phosphate, and there's less of it. And then at 4 seconds, there's less of it. And then at 6 seconds, there's less of it. And then around 8 to 10 seconds, look what happens. We're, below 20% within 10 seconds. But if you look, even though creatine phosphate stores are being depleted rapidly, look at the ATP stores. It drops a little bit, but you're able to maintain that ATP. And what does that mean? Is it means you're able to do more work if you have more creatine phosphate on board. This is why a lot of athletes, going back to what I said a second ago, like to supplement with creatine. Because if you've got more creatine, then not only are you able to do more, say, reps in the weight room over time, you're also able to do and be ready, better prepared for your next set. Because if you've got, more, and I usually will do this, and let's just try it this way. If you've got your current creatine phosphate levels are here, and then you supplement, and so your starting levels are up here, then when you lift, they're, relatively speaking, you're going to be still at a higher level. And not only that is that once you take a break and you rest before that next set, guess what? You're going to end up with higher starting levels there too for the next set, if that makes sense. So over time, guess what happens if you're lifting more weights or you're doing more sets or more reps? Guess what happens? You get stronger. And that's why creatine is such a popular supplement, because it's one of the few that actually works. All right. Go back. Everybody okay with that? And maybe I should show this now. Let's see if this, pull this up. Let's see if I can share this. Okay, I think I got it. Anybody ever heard of a Wingate test? Can y'all see the share? Do athletes take it daily or particularly before? Oh, no, you need to. So Vincent, with the creatine, we'll talk about it, but there's a couple different ways to load it. That's basically what you do, is you load it. Usually it's like 20 grams a day for like 5 days, and then you take a maintenance dose, or, there's several different ways to load it, but not one of these. You just take it one time and see the effects. You have to take it over time. All right. Y'all see my screen here where it says Wingate? Yes, okay. So I'm going to play this, and let's see. So this Wingate test is an all-out bike test, all out for 30 seconds. So it's squarely in this ATP phosphocreatine system process. Basically, you start somebody on a bike, and there's no load on this bike, and they pedal all out. So there's no load, and they're pedaling as hard as they can. And then you see here, there's a weight. The person will drop the weight, and then they pedal against a resistance based on their body weight. And in a lab, like when you're doing research, you usually do multiple tests. So this is his second trial, and you can tell from the first trial he did to the second trial, he's slowing down, especially here at the end, right? And so any strength and power athlete, this would be a good test for them to test their overall, and you can get all kinds of numbers. You can get how much power they're producing, and then you can get the amount of decrease over time in power from the first few seconds to the last few seconds. You can get the differences between trials. Like this is his third trial, and you can already see within the first 5-10 seconds, his legs, he just doesn't have it anymore. And you get rest in between these trials, but not much. when I used to do this in the lab just to demonstrate for students, I would put a trash can over here because oftentimes they will they will get sick because this is an all-out test and it's exhausting. And you can see how this works. And was at a conference. You know, you do this sometimes, right? There are conferences, and vendors will bring their equipment and say, "Hey, somebody want to do a test?" And then you get some crazy guy that decides, "Yeah, I'll do this test in front of everybody," and you can see everybody watching and they're cheering. I don't have the sound up, so you can't hear it. You get the idea. After this guy's third or fourth Wingate test, he's just exhausted. So this is an example of an ATP phosphocreatine system test. There is a little overlap with the glycolytic because it's, you know, around 30 seconds, but all right. It's like, oh, please let me off this bike. I don't, my guess is you haven't seen this test before. I think there's a Wingate bike in the exercise science lab, but last time I was in there, I don't know that it worked. Yeah, incredibly painful for sure. All right, so I will stop sharing this. So that's just an example of the ATP phosphagen system. Okay. I'll make sure I'm sharing. I don't know if I make sure I'm sharing my screen here. All right. Okay, so you should see this now. All right. Everybody good? You're back to seeing my screen. Okay. So the next system then, we've talked about the ATP phosphocreatine system, all out effort, very, very short duration. We're talking strength and power. We're talking football, baseball, volleyball, even basketball. We're talking sprints, short sprints, 100-meter sprints, maybe up to 200-meter sprints. Okay, depending on how fast you are. Everybody okay with this, with that first system? Because it's going to get more complicated as we start talking about the next system, which is the glycolytic system. And when we say the glycolytic system, basically we're saying we're going to break down carbohydrate for energy. Okay, and we do that through a process of glycolysis. And again, quiz question: where does glycolysis occur in the cell? Somebody type it in. Let me know that you're still with me. Type it in the chat. Where does glycolysis occur in the cell? Good, Ella. Thank you for playing that. Cytoplasm. That's exactly right. It happens in the cytoplasm. And this process is a multi-step process. So what you're seeing here on the slide is when we talk about breaking down carbohydrate, remember the simplest form of carbohydrate is called glucose. And so you've got two choices here in how you want to start glycolysis. Either you're bringing glucose in from the blood, or if you remember, we mentioned this, the fact that with carbohydrate, you got carbohydrate that's stored in the muscle in the form of glycogen. Remember that? So you could either, and this is what usually what will happen is initially when you start to exercise intensely, you're going to start to break down glycogen in the muscle. The majority of that energy is coming from glycogen stored in the muscle. But we could also bring in glucose from the blood too. That works. And then and just to keep it simple right now, you run through this process of glycolysis, there's multi-steps, and you end up with a molecule, and actually two molecules of what are called pyruvate. So tell me in the chat, when I say glucose, how many carbons are in a glucose molecule? Somebody? Anybody know? 6? Okay, that was pretty quick. Yes, that's exactly right. So what ends up happening with glycolysis is we're trying to break this glucose down. And so at the end of glycolysis, what we end up with are two molecules of pyruvate, because pyruvate is a molecule that's 3 carbons. So you end up with two 3-carbon molecules of pyruvate. And that's what I'm trying to say here, is that the end product of glycolysis is dependent upon how intensely you're exercising. If I say I'm gonna put all of you out on the track and I want you to run 1 lap around a track as hard as you can go, because you're gonna need energy so quickly and you're gonna need a lot of it, you're gonna those first few seconds, you're going to be using your ATP phosphocreatine systems, but that's not going to be enough, because it's going to take you a minute or two to get around the track. So you're going to have to start breaking down carbohydrate. And as you do that, you're going to need that energy quickly. And so you're going to take this glucose or glycogen, break it down to 2 3-carbon pyruvate molecules, and then you're going to go one step further, because you need this energy quickly. You're going to produce something called lactate or lactic acid. I'm sure you've heard of this. Type in the chat if you've heard of lactate or lactic acid. For our intents and purposes, right now, it's the same thing. It's the same molecule. There's a technical difference, but you're going to produce this lactate. And so what I'm showing you here is, I say glycolysis, end product, either lactic acid, which is the anaerobic end product, or pyruvate, which is the aerobic. Because remember, what we've talked about is that with the oxidative system, like with carbohydrate, I can continue to break down carbohydrate, but I have to do it aerobically, but I have to do it inside the mitochondria. And so there's a metabolic fate here based on the intensity of exercise. If I need energy really, really quickly, I'm going to take these pyruvate molecules and convert them into 2 molecules of lactate. Now, depending on what book you look at, they may call this going from glycogen or glucose to lactate. They call this anaerobic glycolysis. Write that down, anaerobic glycolysis. All that means is that the end product, we need energy so quickly that we need to take this glucose and convert it to lactate. Okay, we get to pyruvate and we take that one extra step. If intensity is on the lighter side, then we can end up taking this pyruvate here that we convert and form in the cytoplasm. We can take this pyruvate on into the mitochondria to continue to break it down. And so we've got 2 3-carbon molecules of pyruvate. Ultimately, what we want to do is to break that down aerobically. If we're going to go aerobically and intensity is lighter, which we'll get to the aerobic system here maybe next class, but this pyruvate, then there's 2 3-carbon structures. Eventually, we're going to break these 2 3-carbon structures to 2 2-carbon structures, and then 2 1-carbon structures. Anybody want to take a guess of what the 1-carbon structure is? If you have oxygen available and you break this down aerobically, I know this is a trick question. This is a hard one. Oh, good. Vincent got it. Boom. Money. Everybody following that? That's where we would like to go. But if you need energy quickly, like you're running around the track, or maybe what else would be an example? You're lifting weights and you're doing a rep of, sets of like 15 to 20, maybe around that, then you're going to be producing that lactic acid. Anybody lifted heavy in the weight room and felt that burning sensation in their muscle? Here's another kind of myth around that. It's not the lactic acid that's causing the burning sensation in your muscle when you're lifting really heavy and you've done multiple reps and you're starting to fatigue. It's actually, there's hydrogen ions that are associated with that. lactate production that causes that burning sensation and the acidity in your muscle, and eventually will cause us to stop exercise. And there are terms, as we're talking about using glycogen to run through glycolysis. When you break down glycogen, it's called glycogenolysis. I don't know if you've heard that before, but that's just a fancy way to say, hey, we're going to take glycogen that's stored in the muscle mainly. If it's stored in the liver, right, because we talked about glycogen being stored in the liver. When you break down glucose, usually what happens in the liver is that glucose is actually going into the bloodstream. And this is the glucose that that's going to be taken up by the muscle and used for energy. Okay. But in most cases, especially with these typical anaerobic, these glycolytic activities, you're going to be using glycogen that you've got stored. All right. So to continue on with this, then the glycolytic system is an anaerobic process. I didn't mention this, but hey, by the time you get to pyruvate, you're only going to produce 2 or 3 ATP. So you're not producing much energy, but you're producing it quickly. And that's the most important thing. Anywhere from, and I've got 15 seconds, you could go to 30 seconds if you wanted to, 30 seconds to 2 minutes of near maximal exercise. Like I said, 1 lap around a track is a good example. Can you think of a sport or activity that lasts somewhere around a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes? And we're talking about the actual play or the work. You know, maybe like hockey, shifts in hockey. If you know anything about hockey, that might be an example. Anything else that you can think of that's around a minute? Like I said, weight training is a really good example. Anybody else come up with one? What about any wrestlers in here, or you know of wrestling? And this is part of understanding the idea around the sport. Anybody know how how wrestling is broken up? Anybody? Yeah, not really. Yeah, so wrestling has 3, and this is high school wrestling. I don't think it's different in college, but 3 2-minute periods. So there's a 2-minute period, which is squarely in this glycolytic system. Okay, so there are 3 of those. Another example of a couple of minutes would be a boxing. Anybody know how many boxing round is? Anybody? A boxing round is 3 minutes long, which would lend majority of it into this glycolytic system. You know, another common one that would use, and you can make an argument for a lot of these different systems, but like MMA, anybody know or what a round is in MMA? Yeah, 5 minutes. They're good. Yeah. And usually what happens is if it's a non-title bout, it's 3 rounds. A title bout will be 5 rounds. So my point here, if we go back to the boxing scenario, how many of you, and this is really going to date me, how many of you have seen the movie Rocky, like the original Rocky with Sylvester Stallone? Anybody seen that movie? Where he's running through the streets, da-da-da, right? You heard the music beating, da-da-da, as he's running through the streets of Philadelphia. Even though a boxing round is 3 minutes, which is squarely in this glycolytic energy system, back in the day of the movie, they used to box for 15 rounds. So yes, it's glycolytic, but they need some aerobic ability too. That's why he's running through the streets. You need some aerobic ability. But if you had to just look at the particular play, or sorry, the particular round, it's mainly glycolytic. And the same thing with if you're looking at MMA, MMA is 5 minutes, which is longer than a couple of minutes, right? Which you think, oh, that's aerobic, but the fighting and the grappling and all the stuff that goes on is really anaerobic. It's more anaerobic than it is aerobic. Although you'll see these athletes running and getting on the bike and doing all the things. Sometimes some of that's to lose weight, but some of it's also to um, is to train their aerobic system. Okay. So just know this, like there's an image of this fella here. He's got his baton in his hand. And my guess is anybody in high school on a relay team, like I'm thinking that this person's doing like a 4x400 relay, like one lap around a track, and he's going to hand it off to his teammate, right? That would be an example of a glycolytic system activity. So that's what we're talking about. I'm going to show you one more example from YouTube, and I see it's going to work. Anybody ever heard of the NFL 225 test? Anybody heard of that before? Yeah, so basically what happens is it doesn't matter. This is in the NFL combine, they evaluate athletes, they're football players, and it doesn't matter what position you play. They put 225 pounds on the bar, and you do it as many times as you can. Okay. So let me show you this and see if we can. Here's one of my favorites videos to show. Okay. Are you seeing this video? This is of this guy, Stephen Pye. It's an older video. Just type in the chat before I play this. What I want you to, can you see it? Yes, no, maybe. I don't see. Okay. I just want to make sure somebody. So I don't know that you can hear the sound on this, but you can probably hear me. So here he goes. He's doing 225. He's making this look like a paperweight. For me, I would get under the bar at 225 and I would be stuck around my neck because I can't lift at one time. So everything is relative. They're counting his reps down there in the left-hand corner. He's at 35 right now. That's ridiculous. But this is how they evaluate, or one of the ways that they evaluate these athletes. And so at this point, his muscles are starting to burn. He's needing that energy quickly. And so he's producing a lot of lactic acid and a lot of hydrogen ions that are associated with that. And eventually what happens is that the acidity will be so great that it'll stop. I don't know if you remember studying muscle physiology, but it will stop the actin and myosin interaction and they'll stop. Here's what I also want you to watch. I'm going to play this again. How long does it take him to do the 49 reps? Okay, you can watch the video and see the time. So he starts at about, okay, so he starts at 12 seconds and starts to lift. I mean, it's just impressive at how easy he makes this look. So we started at 12 seconds. We're at 42 now, so he's been going for 30 seconds. And you're going to start to see in this last 30 seconds or so, he's going to start to fatigue. He's still going. You're going to get to that 49. Ugh. And all right, so he fatigued. So about a minute to do 49 reps. That is squarely a glycolytic energy system activity. Does that make sense? Now, for some of us who, if I were to lift, if I would do like 15 to 20, that would be a glycolytic activity. If you're doing something shorter, like maybe you're only doing 3 reps or 4 reps, or you're doing really heavy weight, that could be ATP phosphocreatine system. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Everybody good with that and understanding this glycolytic. I'm going to do like maybe one more slide or 2 more slides and we'll call it, because I know this is a little heavier today. All right, so can you see? I'm going to shut this down. I got a lot going on right now with this screens, and can you see? I'm going to shut this. You should be able to see, and in the chat, tell me the slides again. 12-step process. Can you see that? Oh, no, you can't. Okay, good. That's what I need to know. Let's see. I want to share. Oh, you're right. Still sharing the. Okay. Try this. How about now? Okay. Good. Okay. So as I mentioned, the glycolytic system is very technical. We're not getting technical. You will not have to memorize, all these different steps. But I do want you to remember or understand the end product. You've got all these 12 steps, and the fate of pyruvate really depends on the availability of oxygen. So what I'm really trying to show you here is that image of the video I just showed you with the guy doing the 225 test. He needed energy so quickly that this pyruvate, which is 2 3-carbon molecules, they didn't have time to enter into the mitochondria of the cell to continue to be broken down. You needed energy quickly, and so we produces lactic acid with that. And in some textbooks, like I know strength and conditioning textbooks, sometimes we'll call it the lactic acid system. The lactic acid system, or you can call it anaerobic glycolysis, where the end product ends up being lactate. And the interesting thing about this, and to note for you, is that this is a pretty inefficient process. Write that down. This is pretty inefficient and it's incomplete, because pyruvic acid or pyruvate is the 3-carbon structure. So you end up with 2 3-carbon. You basically split this molecule, this glucose, this 6-carbon. 1 6-carbon molecule is broken down to 2 3-carbon pyruvates. But then when we convert this to lactate, and I didn't put a 2 on here, and I should have, but these are 2 lactate molecules. Anybody want to take a guess at how many carbons lactate is? Just take a guess. 3. Oh, Carolyn got it. Boom. That's exactly right. So the point is, you don't break this down any further. You end up with lactate. It's incomplete because it's still a 3-carbon structure. And our body will take this lactate, and guess what it will do with it? It's pretty smart. It will take this lactate eventually and reconvert it back to glucose in the body, and it will reuse that glucose. Again, one of the terms, I didn't have it listed here, you may have heard this, gluconeogenesis, right? Where you can take either protein or even like products like lactate and lactic acid and reconvert it back to glucose. But the point here is it's an anaerobic process. It's an incomplete breakdown of glucose. It's not very efficient because you're not completely oxidizing this and breaking it down to CO2, which is what we want to do when we break it down aerobically. Everybody okay with that? I know this is kind of technical, but I just want us to see the big picture, that when you need energy quickly, you don't have time to use oxygen. And so this carbohydrate, which is the next energy system after the ATP phosphocreatine system is exhausted, then we start to use carbohydrate for energy, and we can get energy from that quickly, But at some point, this lactate will build up, and the hydrogen ions associated with this lactate will cause us to stop exercise. Okay. And yeah, everybody okay with that and seeing how this works? And so it really does depend on the availability of oxygen. If it's present, that means your exercise is a little less intense. Now, it can still be pretty intense. You're talking 80, 85%. But once you get up to like 90, 95, all out, then that's a whole different story. There's just no oxygen. You can't get it quickly enough. But if there is oxygen available, we can continue to break this pyruvate down in the mitochondria, and that's what I've got here. Okay, we'll do this slide and we'll call it. But if exercise is less intense and we're able to break down pyruvate into the mitochondria, it's called aerobic glycolysis. And I think I had this on another slide. Remember, when the end product is lactate, we call it sometimes anaerobic glycolysis, just to differentiate, because the truth is glycolysis is anaerobic. But when we call it anaerobic glycolysis versus aerobic, we're just trying to differentiate what the main end product is. Where aerobic glycolysis, if exercise is less intense, you can take this pyruvate on into the mitochondria. And doesn't mean that you're not producing some lactate. And I'll have a slide later to show this, but like even marathoners, when they're running pretty intensely. They're producing a little lactate, but it's not enough to stop their exercise, if that makes sense. Like when you run a marathon, it might be 98% aerobic and 2% anaerobic. So it's not, unless you're sprinting, then that potentially is going to be intense enough to stop your exercise. But for people that are working aerobically, you're able to take these 2,3-carbon pyruvate molecules into the mitochondria and funnel it into what's called acetyl-CoA, which is basically two carbon molecules. Acetyl-CoA is a 2-carbon molecule. And in the Krebs cycle, we're going to be producing CO2 as part of the Krebs cycle. And that's how this works, where you have a complete breakdown or complete oxidation of glucose to CO2. That's kind of the big picture concept of it. And so for us related to sport, any of those activities that are really high intensity and shorter duration are going to be anaerobic. And then as, anything over several minutes, then the aerobic system will ramp up and be the predominant energy system. And that's what we're going to do. I haven't set the deadline, but the next assignment that you have is called the energy system chart assignment. And so I'm going to list a bunch of activities, and you have to tell me which energy system is used and what's the intensity of that sport or that effort. Okay. And I'll maybe introduce that in the next class and set a deadline, but you don't have to worry about it now, but it should be there available in chapter 3. Everybody okay with this? All right, let's do this. I don't want to get into the oxidative system today. We talked some about it though, right? We've talked a little bit about it. And as we have talked about the glycolytic system, the interesting thing about the aerobic system, when you start to use this and pyruvate, take it into this, the mitochondria, is that when you start to use aerobic energy sources, not only are you able to use carbohydrate or glucose, but you're also able to use fat and get a lot of energy from fat. And we'll show you how that happens in next class. So today, just to wrap this bad boy up, we talked about the different extreme types of athletes, strength and power athlete, the endurance athlete, gave you some examples, tried to show you some of this through YouTube and some of these videos. I don't know how well that worked out, but especially with this internet here, but to walk you through ATP phosphocreatine system, all out effort, really short duration, any of your strength and power sports, football, baseball, basketball, volleyball, softball, are examples of ATP phosphocreatine, along with sprinting, usually whether it be on a track, whether it be in the pool, just another example of that. But then after those first 30 seconds, then the intensity is a little lighter, still can be really high, but then you start to use carbohydrate as your next energy source. Okay. And that's way more complicated. Glycolysis is this 10 to 12 step process, depending on if you're starting with glycogen, if you're starting with bringing glucose into the blood, and are you ending up with pyruvate, or you end up with lactate, right? So and again, I won't ask you any of these steps other than just know the big picture concept that when you end up with lactate, that's what we typically call anaerobic glycolysis. And activities like 1 lap around a track would be using that, or lifting weights, 10 to 12, 15 reps, maybe even up to 20, would be examples of that. Does that make sense? And then if intensity is a little lighter, you can shift and not produce as much lactic acid, but then you can take this pyruvate on into the mitochondria to work aerobically. And that's where we're going with our next class. All right. So that's it for me. Do y'all have any questions around that? Any questions around your homework, around the energy expenditure calculations? Any of that? Give me a thumbs up if you're good. Give me a little emoji in here. 100%. All right, y'all. We'll see you next time, and study hard, and we'll see you on Tuesday. All right. Bye.